Throughout my life, I realized that money isn't everything. Yes, it can buy a house, medicine, and security, but I also learned that without it, the lives of so many people can shatter in the blink of an eye. It was with this thought that I found the right person to marry, a strong woman, full of light and generosity, who always saw the world the same way I did. My name is Dorothy, and today I am 74 years old. I've been through a lot in this life, but what I'm going to tell you is too much for any human being. I will tell you everything in this account. I still remember the icy feeling of the wind between the low houses of the Russian village where we chose to live. It was late autumn, and the scent of burning wood from the stoves mixed with the distant aroma of bread that the families baked for dinner. It was in this simple setting, among worn-out walls and sincere smiles, that our story truly began. My husband, whom I'll call Anatoly, out of respect for his memory, and I had just retired. We were both invisible millionaires, people who had always lived comfortably in the United States. My husband had built a fortune through the businesses he ran over the years, but he never allowed money to make us cold or indifferent. Quite the opposite. He always said that true wealth lives in the eyes of those we reach out to help. That early November, as we set foot in that small Russian community, Anatoly's heavy boots crunched in the fresh snow, and the wind pressed our coats against our bodies. We walked slowly, silently, taking in the golden light spilling from fogged windows. I felt the chill slip through the layers of wool that wrapped me, but along with it, I felt a different kind of warmth in my chest. The hope that this choice would give us back the humanity that the world of finance had almost stolen. My friend Ludmila, who lived 2 houses down from us, was the first to greet us. She opened the door of her cottage and looked at us with a mix of surprise and suspicion. I don't blame her. 2 elderly foreigners, dressed plainly, arriving with worn-out suitcases and shy smiles. Nothing about us screamed that we had once owned companies and properties in countries we had never even had the time to visit. Ludmila offered us hot tea and a slice of bread she had just baked. We accepted with gratitude, and it was there that I began to hear the first stories of how local families struggled to pay for medicine and doctor visits for the elderly, and children died as we drank the bitter tea. I noticed the exhaustion in Ludmila's eyes. Her skin was marked by years and harsh winters. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke of her nephew, who couldn't go to school because they couldn't afford the wheelchair he needed. Deep inside, I felt a knot tighten in my chest that almost made me cry right there, but I held back. I glanced at Anatoly, and with a subtle nod, he answered me with an almost invisible gesture. In that very moment, without saying a word, we both knew our journey would begin right there. We decided that we would never reveal that we were wealthy. Why? Because we wanted them to see us as equals, to share their real pain with us, and to see us simply as Dorothy and Anatoly, 2 elderly people who had come to live among them for the love of a simple life. Our goal was never to flaunt anything, but rather to slowly, quietly transform the reality of these people. That same night, before going to sleep, I listened to the distant call of owls mixed with the crackle of wood burning in the fireplace. The house was simple, the mattress a bit stiff, but my heart had never felt so at peace. Anatoly held my hand under the blankets and whispered almost solemnly, "Dorothy, we're going to change this place. 1 house, 1 medicine, 1 wheelchair at a time. And nobody needs to know that it's us." I closed my eyes and let myself drift into a deep sleep, hearing only the wind outside and the promise he had just made. Little did I know that from that point onward, our story would become an invisible thread weaving together lives, restoring hopes and making us realize, day after day, that true wealth had never been kept in vaults, but in the warmth we could spread. Asterisk, if this story is touching your heart, please leave a like. It truly helps this channel and lets me know you want to hear more real stories like this one. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss any of the next chapters that are yet to come. And if you know someone who needs to hear a heartfelt story like this, please share it. Sometimes a simple story can light up someone's entire day. Thank you for being here and listening with your heart. After that first night in the village, my days began to follow a slower, gentler rhythm. Every morning, Anatoly and I would wake to the creak of our old wooden bed, pull on a few extra sweaters, and step outside into the icy streets, determined to see who we could help that day. The village was tucked into a valley surrounded by dark pine forests, and the smell of pine and coal smoke followed us wherever we went. Even after decades in the United States, my tongue still had to wrap itself around the rhythm of Russian names: Nikolai, Irina, Fyodor, Marina. People who would soon feel like family. We introduced ourselves simply as an wise American couple who had chosen a different path after retiring. No one suspected that Anatoly's bank account held a fortune. They saw only my worn scarf and his kind, tired eyes, and slowly began to trust us. I remember one of our first visits was to a small house at the edge of the village, where a woman named Irina struggled to care for her aging mother, Natalia. The tiny house was so cold that my breath misted in front of me as I stepped inside. A single light bulb swayed overhead. Natalia sat wrapped in blankets by the stove, her hands trembling with arthritis as she held a small glass of tea. "You shouldn't be outside in this cold," Irina scolded gently, pressing a bowl of soup into my hands. "I wanted to come," I replied with a smile. "I want to see how you're really doing." And then Irina told me everything about the hospital visits they couldn't pay for, the medicine they rationed carefully because they couldn't afford the full prescription, the nights spent praying for help. My heart felt so heavy I thought it might sink to my knees. Anatoly, standing silently in the doorway, caught my eye. That was all it took. We both knew what needed to happen. The next morning, we walked to the nearest clinic too. Villages over and paid for Natalia's medication and checkups for an entire year. Of course, we never told Irina or Natalia that it was us. Instead, we left a small unsigned note with the clinic receptionist and hoped they would simply accept this miracle as a blessing. That was only the first of many secret acts. Anatoly and I fell into a gentle rhythm, my days full of tiny, powerful decisions. Handing a folded envelope to a schoolteacher with a shy smile so she could buy school supplies for the children. Paying for a neighbor's surgery and hearing later that it had saved his life. Bringing wheelchairs that nobody could trace back to us. Repainting a crumbling house one summer while the owners were away, then disappearing before they could say thank you. And every time, when we walked home hand in hand, my heart felt lighter. The village was still poor. Yes, it had been poor for decades, but bit by bit, our small, invisible kindness was like stitching a torn quilt back together. I began to sleep better at night. I began to dream more vividly, too, of green gardens in bloom, of children laughing, of Natalia walking with more strength. And through all of this, Anatoly kept his gentle humor, his strong hands holding my smaller, colder ones as we crossed the frozen paths together. That's the magic of this kind of life, one built not on money for its own sake, but on the deep, quiet satisfaction of lifting someone else up. The longer we stayed, the more it felt like we had finally come home. Asterisk. As the months unfolded, my understanding of this village and its people deepened in ways I could never have imagined. Winter began to loosen its icy grip, and the first signs of spring, patches of green grass and small, defiant flowers pushing up through the dark soil, felt like gentle promises of renewal. Every morning, Anatoly and I would rise early, sip strong black tea together, and plan our quiet missions for the day. One morning, I remember setting out to visit an old carpenter named Dmitri. His hands, gnarled by years of working wood, could hardly grip his tools anymore. The village children would sometimes stop outside his tiny shop just to hear him tell stories of the boats he had built when he was a younger man. But now his craft was slipping away because of pain that never left his joints. When we visited him, I could hear his breathing, a tired, strained sound that told me what his eyes wouldn't. The room smelled of pine shavings and linseed oil, and on the shelves were small wooden toys carved long ago. Horses, boats, tiny figures with delicate features. Dmitri tried to smile as we came in, though I saw the sadness that lingered in his gaze. "Dorothy, Anatoly," he greeted us softly. "It's good to see friendly faces today. How can I help you?" I looked at him and felt my heart ache. "No, Dmitri," I said gently. "We're here to see how we can help you." And that was all it took. Within days, Anatoly had arranged for a doctor from the nearest town to visit Dmitri. The doctor examined him carefully, an expensive home visit, but one we were more than willing to pay for, and left him with a treatment plan that would ease his pain and allow him to work a few hours every day without suffering. We also made sure his shop was stocked with food and firewood. Again, we never said who was responsible. It was enough for us to see the light return to Dmitri's face when we next passed by, and heard him humming a melody as he sanded a new piece of birch into shape. That was the rhythm of those months. Every few days, we would come across someone like Dmitri, someone who had nearly given up hope because the world had moved too fast and left them behind. There was Olga, the mother of 3, who was too proud to ever ask for help. So we left a box of groceries and warm blankets on her porch one chilly night and slipped away before dawn. There was Sasha, the teenage boy whose legs had been weakened by childhood illness, and for whom we quietly arranged a sturdy new wheelchair so that he could finally join his friends outside and go to school again. And as we did these things, small, gentle gestures that nobody would ever trace back to us, I began to feel the village transforming. Not because we changed everything overnight, but because we gave people a reason to believe again. A reason to look at one another with kindness rather than worry. To share their burdens as if they belonged to everyone. In the evenings, after our work was done, Anatoly and I would sit together by the small kitchen window, listening to the sleepy sounds of the village outside, a dog barking far away, the faint melody of someone playing an accordion, the rustle of trees along the hills. My hands would find his under the wooden table, fingers intertwined, and we would simply smile at each other. "You see?" Anatoly would whisper sometimes. "This is the kind of wealth that never runs out." And I knew exactly what he meant. Every day spent like this was a treasure, one we would carry forever. Our secret life in this little Russian village was slowly becoming the most valuable thing we had ever built together. By the time summer finally unfurled across the village, life had taken on a gentle rhythm that felt like a melody we all knew by heart. The landscape softened into a lush green, with wildflowers dotting the hillsides like tiny bursts of color, and the scent of grass and warm earth drifted in every breeze. The narrow paths that had been crusted with snow only a few months ago were now alive with the sound of children's feet and the laughter of old friends meeting by the well. And in the middle of all this gentle beauty, Anatoly and I kept moving quietly, like two small streams feeding into a larger river. Every morning, we would rise with the sun, our hands calloused from work and our hearts full with the knowledge that there was more to do. That summer, one of the most memorable encounters we had was with a girl named Kira. She was 13, too small for her age, with a quick smile and serious eyes that had already seen too much. Her mother, Katya, told me one morning as we picked wild herbs by the forest edge that Kira had always dreamed of studying, of one day becoming a doctor. The books were a luxury they could never afford. That was the kind of need most people never noticed, not as urgent as medicine or food, perhaps, but just as important. So one bright afternoon, after Katya and Kira had left for the village. Center, Anatoly and I quietly left a box on their porch filled with school supplies, textbooks, and a few beautiful notebooks that felt too fine for hands so small. There was also a carefully folded note that simply read, "Keep dreaming. The world needs hearts like yours." That was all Dot and Kira's face when she discovered the box. That was enough thanks for a lifetime. Dot in the evenings, after our rounds, Anatoly and I would sometimes walk up the gentle hill behind our house and look down at the village, spread out below us like a sleepy painting. The sky would flush orange and pink, casting long shadows across the rooftops. Birds circled lazily overhead, and I would lean my head against his shoulder, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his breath. "You never get tired of this," I murmured. Once my voice nearly lost in the whisper of the grass. He took my hand, his grip warm and sure. "Never," he replied. "Every face, every story reminds me why we're here." And it was true. Each person we had helped was like a thread stitched into a beautiful, invisible tapestry that belonged to everyone. By the end of that summer, we began to feel the village truly embrace us as one of its own. Ludmila would knock on our door with a basket of fresh bread. Dmitri would call out a warm greeting as we passed by his shop. And though nobody ever suspected the full depth of our secret, there was a lightness in their eyes when they spoke to us, as if they somehow understood that we weren't just visitors, but part of the village heartbeat. And every day, as I went to bed, my hands aching with pleasant exhaustion and my soul humming with quiet joy, I would close my eyes and remember what Anatoly had told me so long ago on that first snowy night. "We're going to change this place. One house, one medicine, one chair at a time." And somehow, with each quiet gesture, we were. As autumn began to creep into the hills again, the days slowly grew shorter and the lights softer, casting long golden beams across the village rooftops. Every morning when I woke, I could feel the faint crispness in the air and catch the scent of wood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. The village was settling into its familiar rhythm as harvest time approached, and we felt more connected than ever to its gentle pulse. It was during this time that we met a man named Mikhail. He was a farmer in his 60s, with hands roughened by years of work and eyes that held a quiet dignity. One morning, as we helped repair a gate outside Ludmila's house, he paused nearby to catch his breath. That was when we began to talk. He spoke slowly at first, telling us about his orchard just outside the village and about how last winter had damaged most of his trees. I listened closely as his deep voice rumbled on, describing the worry that had kept him up at night and how he had considered selling his land just to make ends meet. It was clear that for Mikhail, those trees weren't just crops. They were his legacy, a link to his father and his grandfather before him. That evening, Anatoly and I sat together by our small kitchen fire, the house wrapped in the deep blue of early dusk. "You saw the way Mikhail spoke about those trees," Anatoly said, stirring his tea. "Yes," I whispered. "That orchard is part of him. Losing it would be like losing a piece of his soul." He nodded, and though we didn't need to say more, we both knew what had to be done. The next morning we set off before sunrise. The forest was wrapped in mist, the ground damp and soft under our boots as we made our way to Mikhail's farm. From the shelter of a stand of trees, we measured the rows of damaged trunks and planned what would need replacing. In the days that followed, we quietly arranged for new saplings to be delivered, hardy trees that would survive the harsh winters. By the time Mikhail discovered the crates stacked at the edge of his orchard, it was too late for him to return. I heard later from Ludmila that he had stood there for a long while in silence, before wiping his eyes with his sleeve and setting to work planting the new trees himself. That autumn was also a season of small surprises. Children began to play outside longer into the crisp evenings, laughing and chasing each other under skies painted orange and pink. Every so often, someone would leave a bunch of herbs or a jar of preserves at our door, gifts for the kind couple from America, they'd say, and we accepted these tokens with warmth, feeling that something unspoken had passed between us and this village. They didn't need to know who we really were. What mattered was that they felt seen and valued, that they understood someone cared enough to make their days a little easier. And as I lay down at night beside Anatoly, feeling his steady heartbeat in the dark, I thought about the gentle, invisible threads that tied us all together. Threads spun from compassion and care, reaching far beyond money, and bringing a light to this place that no amount of wealth could ever buy. Asterisk. The days continued to slip gently into one another like the slow turning of a well-worn clock. Autumn deepened into a colder, more contemplative season. The mornings were now misted over with silvery fog, and my hands were always a little stiff as I kindled the fire before breakfast. Anatoly moved more slowly too, his breath clouding in the chilly air as he split kindling outside. And though he never complained, I could see that this life was more demanding than it had been in our younger years. And yet, neither of us had ever felt so truly alive. One morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't like the usual letters, the simple notes left on our porch by villagers or the occasional postcards from friends overseas. This one was stamped with the village doctor's mark, and inside was a careful note in neat, tidy script. Dear Dorothy and Anatoly, I don't know what kind of quiet magic you have brought into this village, but I must tell you that more people have been seeking care this year than I can remember. Medicines I thought we would never afford have appeared. Operations that once seemed impossible have been covered. I don't know who you are, or if you had a hand in this, but whoever is responsible, we thank them from the bottom of our hearts. Reading those words aloud, my hands trembled slightly. Anatoly came to stand behind me, his hands warm and steady on my shoulders. It's working, I whispered. Yes, he replied softly. And we can do even more. That was the spark that lit our next quiet plan. A few days later, we took a long walk up to the edge of the village where an old schoolhouse sat empty. Its windows were cracked, its wooden floor buckled, and its blackboard covered with dust. A place long forgotten as children had been bused to a larger town instead. I ran my fingers along the worn desks and felt a pang of sorrow at the silence. That was when I thought of Kira, bright-eyed Kira, who had dreamed of becoming a doctor. I thought of all the children like her, scattered across these hills, who deserved a safe place to grow and learn. That evening, Anatoly and I spoke late into the night by our small fire, weaving together a plan like we were weaving a warm scarf. To guard against the coming winter dot, and before the first snow fell, we began making small, careful contributions. New glass for the windows, warm blankets for every desk, fresh paints, and a few second-hand books that we left in crates by the door. At dawn, never waiting to see who would find them first, within a few weeks, the schoolhouse was alive again. The villagers, stirred by this unexpected gift, came together to repair the roof and smooth the floors. And when the teacher from the nearby town heard of the revived school, she agreed to come each week to hold lessons for the village children. And we would pass by sometimes at dusk, hands clasped together, listening to the distant sound of children's voices rising into the cold air like a song. That sound, warm and hopeful, was all the thanks we ever needed. As the weeks passed and winter began to settle more firmly over the hills, the village took on a hushed beauty. Each morning, when I stepped outside, my boots crunched into a pristine layer of snow, and my breath curled into small clouds that danced away into the pale sky. The world felt slower, more fragile, as if we were all holding our breath together, waiting for something new to unfold. And something new did come, though not in the way we expected. That winter, a harsh flu began to sweep quietly through the village. First, it was just a few sniffles and fevers, easy to overlook. But by mid-December, I saw the strain in everyone's eyes. Parents held their children close as they hurried between houses. Elders like Natalia, who had grown so much stronger under the care we'd quietly funded, were vulnerable all over again. Even Ludmila, usually so cheerful, confessed one morning as she sipped tea at my kitchen table, "Everyone is tired, Dorothy. Everyone is scared." That was when Anatoly and I knew it was time for another kind of help, something less subtle, more decisive. We began making trips into town, buying blankets and medicine in bulk, careful to hide our names as best we could. Every few nights, long after most of the village was asleep, we left parcels on porches wrapped in brown paper and twine, labeled simply, "For you." More than once, I paused to catch my breath in the darkened snow, feeling my heart pound as I slipped away from a gate or leaned into Anatoly's strong arms for support. "There," he would whisper. "That's another family warm tonight." And it was true. One by one, the sickness began to retreat. The village held together, not just because of the supplies, but because of the spirit that had begun to grow between them. The children played outside again, cheeks rosy with cold, but eyes bright with health. Parents' hands no longer trembled when they raised them in greeting. Even Natalia, whom I visited one bright morning, pressed my hands warmly between her own and murmured a quiet "Spasibo," the only word she could manage through her smile. That was the miracle of these days, not grand or public, but real and tender. And as Anatoly and I walked home beneath a sky strewn with winter stars, I felt his gloved fingers wrap around mine, solid and sure. "Do you feel it too?" I whispered into the dark. "Yes," he answered simply. "We're part of this village now. Maybe we always were." And in that silence, under those patient, twinkling stars, my heart filled with a peace deeper than any treasure we had ever held. Asterisk, by the time the deep heart of winter embraced the village, a profound sense of quiet solidarity had taken hold. The days were short and hushed, the nights long and filled with the orange glow of lanterns flickering through frosted windows. Every morning, as I pulled my scarf tight around my neck and Anatoly, and I set off into the crisp, pale light, I felt that we had become part of the village's pulse, as familiar as the smoke curling from chimneys, or the sound of boots crunching on the frozen paths. That sense of belonging was what allowed us to do what came next. One particular morning, as the snow fell in great feathery flakes, Ludmila stopped by our door. Her face was drawn, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she held a battered woolen hat between them. "Dorothy," she said softly, "I don't mean to trouble you, but my sister Vera—" Her voice broke, and she looked down. "Vera has been so sick. The doctor says she needs an operation. But the hospital, we can't pay for it. I wouldn't have asked, but I don't know what else to do." I reached out and took her hands in mine, feeling the chill of them, hearing the fear trembling behind her words. "Ludmila," I whispered, "you never need to apologize for caring about someone you love. Anatoly and I will help you." That evening, we moved in silence as we arranged for Vera's treatment. A call to a clinic in the nearest town. Funds wired carefully under an anonymous name. A small handwritten note left on Ludmila's porch that read simply, "Your sister's care is secured. Have faith." When Ludmila came to us a few days later, her eyes bright with relief, lips trembling with emotions too big for words, she never asked who had sent that help. She only hugged me so tightly, I thought my ribs would crack, and whispered, "Spasibo, my dear friend," over and over into my ear. That was the rhythm of our days that winter. Giving, watching, holding our breath for the outcome, then feeling a quiet wave of relief when a smile returned to someone's face. And it wasn't only illness we fought. Sometimes the work was humbler. Buying shoes for a boy who had none that fit. Mending a torn coat so a grandmother could take her grandson to school without shivering or arranging for extra food to find its way into the cupboards of a house where the pantry was too bare. With every small miracle that unfolded in that village, my heart felt lighter and my hands steadier. And as Anatoly and I sat together by the fire in the evenings, tired, sometimes aching, but more content than we had ever been, I realized that this was the true wealth we had searched for all our lives. Not the coins stacked in a vault or the figures printed in ledgers, but this, the way a community heals when it is held together by unseen hands, and the way even the smallest kindness can bloom into something beautiful. And outside our window, the snow kept falling, gentle and ceaseless, blanketing the world in softness as if it too wished to care for this little village we had come to love. As winter began to loosen its grip and the first hints of spring appeared, the faint scent of melting snow, the gentle trickle of water along cobblestone paths, the village felt like it was stirring from a long and quiet dream. The mornings grew softer, with pink lights spilling across the hills, and the evenings held a gentle hum of voices as people began to spend more time outside their homes. By then, Anatoly and I had woven ourselves into the very fabric of this village. Every face was familiar, every story cherished. The walls between strangers and friends had long since dissolved into nothing but warm greetings and quiet smiles. And yet, as full as my days were, there was one thing that still kept me awake at night, a lingering fear that someone would discover our secret too soon, that they'd recognize the hands behind the help and feel indebted or embarrassed. Our purpose had never been to draw attention to ourselves. Quite the opposite. We wanted people to feel empowered, as if their strength had come from their own resilience, not from a distant fortune they didn't even know was there. One bright morning, as we walked toward the edge of the village, Anatoly paused and looked at me, his face more serious than usual. "Dorothy," he said softly, "do you ever wonder what would happen if someone found out? What they'd say?" I looked at him, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper, his silver hair catching the light, and thought about the months we'd spent quietly putting this village back on its feet. "Yes," I answered honestly. "I do. But I also know that this place deserves help without pity, without obligation. They deserve to believe in their own strength." He took my hands in his, rubbing my fingers gently to warm them. "Then, we'll continue as we are," he replied, his voice sure. "And we'll keep caring for them as long as we can." That was all that needed to be said. A few days later, we passed by the schoolhouse we had helped restore, hearing the sound of children reading aloud inside. The windows had been repaired, the steps swept clean. Further down the lane, old Dmitri was working again in his shop, his hands more confident as they shaped a small wooden horse. Ludmila waved to us across the street, a basket of bread in her arms and a bright smile on her face, and my heart felt full in a way that went deeper than mere happiness. It was a sense of quiet purpose, a deep and profound peace that came from knowing we had created ripples of light that would go on long after we were gone. That evening, as we sat together by the fire, listening to the village settle into its gentle nighttime hush, I rested my head on Anatoly's shoulder. "Do you remember," I murmured, "what you told me the first night we arrived here?" He smiled into my hair. "One house, one medicine, one chair at a time," he answered. "Yes," I whispered. "And look at what those small things have become." Outside, a warm breeze moved through the branches, and the distant laughter of children mingled with the stirring of the village as it embraced the turning season. I felt, more than ever, that this was exactly where we were meant to be. By the time spring had fully taken hold of the village, everything felt as if it had been reborn. The hills were lush with new grass, the air smelled of fresh rain and soil, and color returned to the gardens tucked behind wooden fences. Everywhere you looked, there were signs of renewal. tiny green shoots unfurling toward the light, and children running in and out of houses as if they, too, had been set free by the change of season. And through it all, Anatoly and I kept to our quiet rhythm. Our hands were always busy, our hearts always full, even as the years slowly gathered on our shoulders like a familiar cloak. Every morning began with a list of small hopes and gentle tasks. Delivering blankets to an elderly couple who couldn't heat their house properly, buying school books for the teacher who could never afford new ones, or finding ways to make sure that nobody went without food when the pantry shelves ran bare. One warm afternoon, as we stood together in the village square, I felt someone tug at my sleeve. It was little Sasha, the boy who had once needed a wheelchair and now ran as freely as any other child. "Dorothy," he asked, eyes shining up at me, "are you and Anatoly angels?" I laughed, a soft surprise sound, and crouched. So we were face to face. "Oh, darling," I replied, "we're just two people who care very much about this village, about you." He considered that carefully, his brow furrowing. "Then you must be angels in disguise," he declared, satisfied. And I thought, in that moment, of all the hands we had held and all the quiet stories we had gathered into our hearts. None of them had been easy. Many had been steeped in hardship, loss, and worry. But they had also been laced with an astonishing resilience, the kind that reminds you that the beauty can grow even in the hardest soil. That night, as Anatoly and I sat outside beneath a sky scattered with silver stars, I felt his hand close warmly around mine. "Do you see it too?" I asked him softly. He nodded, his voice gentle in the dark. "Yes, this village is alive in a way I never thought possible." And I understood then that this was our true purpose. Not to be thanked or celebrated, but to witness the slow unfolding of hope where once there had been none. To stand quietly in the background as life began to grow again, stronger and brighter than ever. And as the spring wind carried the faint scent of blossoming trees across the hills, I felt my heart settle into a deep and abiding peace, knowing that this village had changed forever and that we had been forever changed along with it. As summer unfurled its warm embrace over the village once more, the hillsides shimmered with green and the days grew long and gentle. Flowers burst into color along the winding paths, and every evening the skies glowed pink and orange as the sun lingered a little longer before setting. It was during this season that a quiet sense of triumph began to settle into my heart, not a loud or boastful feeling, but a soft, enduring joy that I carried with me wherever I went. By then, Anatoly and I had been part of the village's story for what felt like a lifetime. Every face was familiar. Every home held a memory, from the day we left medicine on Natalia's doorstep to the morning we tucked new books into Kira's hands. Our secret acts of kindness had become like the breeze through these hillsides, gentle, constant, and impossible to separate from the life that unfolded here. And yet, in the deepest part of my soul, I sensed that this chapter of our story was approaching its close. Maybe it was the ache in my knees when I woke up in the morning, or the new silver strands glinting in Anatoly's hair when we sat together in the candlelight. Maybe it was just the understanding that even the most beautiful journeys must eventually give way to new ones. One golden afternoon, we found ourselves walking toward the edge of the village, where the grass grew taller and the forest began to murmur with the rustle of summer breezes. "Do you feel it too?" I asked Anatoly softly. He paused and looked at me, his gaze warm and knowing. "Yes," he replied after a moment. "I do, and I'm at peace with it." We stood there for a long while, hands clasped together, looking out at the hills rolling away into the distance like waves on a green sea. "You've given these people so much," I whispered. He smiled gently. "So have you." And together, we gave them something they may never have thought they could have: belief in themselves, in one another, even in strangers like us who appeared one winter and never left. That evening, as we sat by the fire once more, I thought of all the hands we'd held and all the small miracles we'd witnessed. I thought of the way the village children now ran laughing through streets that had once been silent, of the way Ludmila greeted us every morning with a bright wave and a loaf of warm bread, of the way people had begun to look not at what they lacked, but at what they had built together. And my heart felt full to bursting with a quiet, shining hope that tomorrow, and the days after that, we would go on as we always had, one gentle gesture at a time, one small light kindled in the dark. But tonight, beneath a sky freckled with stars and in the shelter of Anatoly's embrace, I felt a profound and peaceful certainty that what we had begun here would live on, long after we were gone. Asterisk, as the years rolled gently onward and the village became forever imprinted on my soul, I found myself looking back on all that had happened with a kind of quiet awe. Every hardship we had witnessed, every hand we had held, every small gesture we had offered, all of it had woven together into a story greater than we could ever have imagined. And if there is one lesson that has stayed with me most deeply, it is this: money, for all its power, is never the heart of true wealth. True wealth lives in the lives we touch and the hearts we warm. It lies in the hands extended without expectation, in the strength we help kindle in someone who thought they had none left, in the quiet, enduring light that spreads when we dare to care. When Anatoly and I first came to this village, two aging strangers in unfamiliar surroundings, we never thought we could make such a difference. We had hoped to give a little back, to ease a few burdens, and then slip into the gentle rhythm of a simple life. But what we found was so much more. We found a community that embraced us, that showed us resilience and grace, that taught us how to live all over again. And together, one quiet miracle at a time, we built something lasting. Now, as I look around me, at the children racing past with laughing eyes, at the gardens blooming behind every gate, at the sense of trust and togetherness that shines in every glance, I understand what Anatoly and I have truly left behind. Not gifts wrapped in paper or coins counted and spent, but a legacy of compassion and hope that will live on long after we're gone. And if my story can touch your heart, in even the smallest way, if it can remind you that you have the power to help someone even without great wealth, then my life will have been well spent. Sometimes all it takes is one gentle soul to change the course of someone else's day, to light a path where none was seen before. That, to me, is the true value of all we hold dear, the knowledge that we can leave this world better than we found it, one small kindness at a time. And so I close my eyes tonight in this tiny house surrounded by familiar hills, my hands still held warmly in Anatoly's, and I give thanks for this village, for every face and every story, and for the quiet, enduring gift of knowing that love, compassion, and generosity will forever outlast any fortune.